Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now, let's start. The harsh winds of the North Sea lashed against Bjorn Bjarnason's face as his longship cut through the choppy waters. The raid on the Saxon monastery had gone well, too well. He stood tall at the bow, his broad shoulders squared against the biting cold, blood still fresh on his axe. His men celebrated behind him, counting their plunder of silver, manuscripts, and captured thralls. But Bjorn remained silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the first light of dawn broke across the sky. "A good raid, Bjorn," called Halfdan, his second in command. "The gods favor us this day." Bjorn nodded but said nothing. 28 winters had passed since his birth, and he had spent 10 of those years raiding. The glory that once filled his heart with each conquest now left him hollow. The weight of his father's legacy, the great Bjarni the Bold, pressed upon him like Thor's hammer. His father had died in these same waters 5 summers past, and Bjorn had sworn to make the Saxons pay. "We returned to Hedeby with enough silver to make even Jarl Eriksson envious," Halfdan continued, raising his drinking horn. The mood aboard the longship was triumphant as they navigated toward home. None of them noticed the small Saxon ship that had begun to follow them at a distance, nor did they see the figures aboard loading arrows into their bows. The first shaft caught Bjorn in the back, just below his shoulder blade. The second struck his thigh. He roared with pain and rage as he fell to his knees on the deck. "Saxons!" shouted Halfdan, pointing to the pursuing vessel. The Viking warriors scrambled for their shields, but another volley of arrows rained down upon them. Bjorn, already wounded, took a third arrow to his side as he attempted to rise. Blood pooled beneath him on the wooden planks of the ship. "Row," commanded Halfdan. "Row for Hedeby." The oars dipped into the churning sea as the Vikings bent their backs to escape. The Saxon ship followed for a time but eventually fell behind, unable to match the speed of the longship even with wounded men at the oars. When they finally reached the safety of Hedeby's harbor, Bjorn was unconscious, his skin pale and cold. The wounds had festered during the journey, and a fever gripped him. "Get him to the healer," Halfdan ordered as they carried Bjorn's massive frame from the ship. But the old healer shook his head after examining the wounds. "The poison spreads quickly. Even if I remove the arrows, the damage is done. He will join his ancestors in Valhalla before the next sunrise." Halfdan cursed and stormed from the healer's hut. He would not accept this fate for his friend and leader. There were whispers of another healer, a woman who lived on the edge of the settlement. A foreigner with strange powers. As darkness fell over Hedeby, Halfdan made his decision. He returned to Bjorn's side and, with the help of 2 loyal warriors, carried him through the shadows to a small hut nestled between the forest and the sea. Viola Sutton had come to the Viking lands 3 years earlier, a captive taken during a raid on her Saxon village. Her knowledge of herbs and healing had spared her from becoming a thrall. Instead, she lived apart from the settlement, tolerated for her skills but never accepted. When the pounding came at her door that night, Viola knew it meant trouble. No Viking came to her willingly except in the most desperate circumstances. She opened the door to find 3 warriors carrying their fallen comrade. "Save him," demanded Halfdan, his voice rough with emotion. "I know you have powers beyond our understanding." Viola's eyes fell upon the wounded man. Even in his weakened state, she recognized him, Bjorn Bjarnason, the most feared raider in all of Hedeby. The man whose raiders had destroyed her village and killed her family. "Why would I save the man who brought such suffering to my people?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear clutching at her heart. Halfdan drew his sword. "Because if you don't, you will join him in death." Viola held his gaze. "Kill me then. I will not use my gifts to save a murderer." But as she spoke, Bjorn's eyes fluttered open. In his delirium, he reached out a blood-stained hand toward her. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I am not ready to die." Something in his plea touched her. Not compassion, exactly, but a sense that fate had brought them to this moment for a purpose. She stepped aside and allowed them to bring him into her small home. "Leave us," she commanded once they had laid Bjorn on her sleeping platform. What I must do cannot be witnessed by others. If he dies, Halfdan began. Then you can kill me tomorrow, Viola interrupted. But if you want him to live, you will go now and return at dawn. Reluctantly, Halfdan and the others departed, leaving Viola alone with the dying Viking warrior. She looked down at him, conflicted. To save him would be to betray her own people. To let him die would mean her own death. But there was more than that. The magic required to heal wounds this severe was forbidden, even among her own kind. It would bind them together in ways neither could foresee. "Do you know who I am?" she asked him as she began to gather her herbs and powders. Bjorn's eyes focused on her briefly. "The Saxon witch," he murmured. "I am Viola of Wessex," she corrected. "Your men burned my village 3 summers ago. My parents and brothers died by Viking blades." Recognition dawned in his fevered eyes. "Then let me die," he said. Viola paused. "Why?" "Because death in battle leads to Valhalla," he replied. "And because?" "I am tired of killing." His admission surprised her. She had expected defiance or pride, not this glimpse of humanity. She continued her preparations, grinding herbs and mixing them with water from her well. "If I save you," she said as she worked, "it will not be with mere herbs. The poison is too deep in your blood. I must use the old magic forbidden by both your gods and mine." Bjorn watched her through pain-clouded eyes. "What is the price?" "A bond," she said simply. "Between healer and healed. Your life will be tied to mine, and mine to yours." He considered this as another wave of pain racked his body. "Do it," he finally gasped. Viola nodded and began her work. First, she cleaned his wounds with a mixture of boiled water and strong spirits. Then she applied poultices of herbs to draw out the poison. But these were merely preparations for what was to come. As midnight approached, she lit 7 candles made of beeswax and placed them in a circle around her small hut. She took a knife and made a small cut across her palm, then did the same to Bjorn's hand. Pressing their wounds together, she began to chant in the ancient tongue of her people, words passed down through generations of women in her family, words that had not been spoken in the northern lands for centuries. The candles flared, their flames stretching toward the ceiling. The air in the small hut grew thick and charged with power. Bjorn felt a burning sensation where their blood mingled, a fire that spread up his arm and throughout his body. He arched his back in pain, but Viola held firm, continuing her chant without pause. Images flooded his mind, memories that were not his own. A small Saxon village by the sea. A young girl learning healing arts from her mother. The terror of a Viking raid seen through the eyes of the victims. And then his own memories reflected back at him, the thrill of battle, the weight of his father's expectations, the emptiness that followed each conquest. When the ritual ended, Viola collapsed beside him, exhausted. The bond was formed. His wounds remained, but the poison had been purged from his body. He would live. Dawn broke over Hedabai, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Halfdan returned to Viola's hut, his hand on his sword hilt, prepared to find his friend dead and to exact vengeance. Instead, he found Bjorn sitting up, weak but alert, while Viola slept on a mat near the hearth. "By Odin's eye," Halfdan whispered. "How is this possible?" Bjorn looked at the sleeping Saxon woman. "She has powerful magic," he said simply. "Then we must take you home before she bewitches you further," Halfdan insisted. But when they tried to move Bjorn, a searing pain shot through his chest, the same pain reflected on Viola's face as she awakened with a cry. They discovered that they could not be separated by more than the length of the hut without both experiencing agony. "What have you done to me, Saxon?" demanded Bjorn. Viola met his gaze steadily. "I told you there would be a price. The bond that saved your life now ties us together. In time, the distance may grow, but for now, we must remain close." Halfdan drew his sword. "Release him from this spell, or I will end it with your death." "No." Bjorn's command stopped his friend. "If she dies, I fear I may follow. We must find another way." Word of the Saxon healer's magic spread quickly through Hedeby. Some called for her execution as a witch. Others feared the power she held over their greatest warrior. Jarl Eriksson himself came to see the truth of the rumors. "This cannot stand," the Jarl declared after witnessing the bond between them. A warrior of Bjorn's standing, bound to a Saxon prisoner. "It brings shame upon our settlement." "I did only what was asked of me," Viola said, standing tall despite the fear churning in her stomach. "He was dying. I saved him." The Jarl stroked his grey-flecked beard. "Then undo what you have done." "I cannot," she admitted. "The bond will weaken with time, but to break it now would kill us both." The Jarl turned to Bjorn. "And what say you, son of Bjarni? Will you live as a half-man, tethered to this foreign woman?" Bjorn looked at Viola, seeing her truly for the first time since the ritual. She was beautiful in a way different from Viking women, smaller, with dark hair that fell in waves to her waist and eyes the color of the forest in summer. But it was her courage that impressed him most. She stood before the Jarl without flinching, though she knew her life hung in the balance. "I say that I live because of her skill," Bjorn replied carefully. "And I honor my debts. She will remain under my protection until this bond fades." The Jarl was not pleased, but he respected Bjorn too much to argue further. "So be it. But she is your responsibility. Any trouble she causes falls upon your head." And so began their strange arrangement. Viola moved into Bjorn's longhouse, given a small room separated from the main hall by a curtain. Close enough to prevent the pain of separation, yet with some pretense of privacy. The other members of Bjorn's household, servants and warriors who lived under his roof, watched her with suspicion and fear. As the days passed, Bjorn's wounds healed with remarkable speed. The bond between them allowed him to draw strength from Viola, though it drained her in turn. Each night, she would collapse into exhausted sleep while he grew stronger. "You should eat more," he told her one evening as he noticed her picking at her food. "You grow thinner while I grow stronger." Viola shrugged. "The magic takes its toll. It will pass." "Why did you do it?" he asked suddenly. "You could have let me die. You had every reason to." She was silent for a long moment. "I am a healer," she finally said. "I cannot turn away from those in need, even enemies." "Are we still enemies, then?" There was something in his voice she couldn't identify, disappointment, perhaps. "What else would we be?" she countered. "Your people destroyed mine. You took me from my home." "I was not part of the raid that took you," he said. "But you've led raids on other villages. Killed other families." Her voice held no accusation, only stated fact. He couldn't deny it. "It is our way. And it is my way to heal, not harm," she replied. "So here we are, bound by magic and contradictions." As weeks passed, the bond between them began to change. The physical distance they could maintain gradually increased, from the length of a room to the breadth of the longhouse, then to the yard beyond. But as the physical bond weakened, another kind of connection grew stronger. Bjorn found himself seeking Viola's company not out of necessity but desire. He brought her materials for her healing work, listened to her stories of her homeland, and shared tales of his own childhood. She, in turn, began to see the man beyond the warrior, a man burdened by expectations, haunted by his father's legacy, questioning the path that had been laid before him. One night, as they sat by the hearth after the household had gone to sleep, Bjorn asked her to teach him about her healing arts. "Why would a warrior want to learn healing?" she asked, surprised by his request. "Perhaps I am tired of causing wounds and wish to mend them instead," he replied. She studied his face in the firelight, searching for mockery but finding only sincerity. "Very well," she agreed. "We'll begin tomorrow." True to his word, Bjorn proved an attentive student. His large hands, so skilled with axe and sword, struggled at first with the delicate work of preparing herbs and creating poultices. But he persisted, and Viola found herself admiring his determination. The people of Hedeby watched this strange relationship with growing unease. A warrior learning a woman's craft? A Saxon prisoner walking freely among them? whispers spread that Viola had bewitched not only Bjorn's body but his mind as well. Halfdan confronted his friend as they trained in the practice yard. "The men talk," he said as they circled each other with practice swords. "They say you grow soft under the Saxon woman's influence." Bjorn parried Halfdan's thrust with ease. "And am I soft now?" he asked, launching a counterattack that sent his friend stumbling backward. "Your body remains strong," Halfdan admitted, regaining his stance. "But what of your spirit? You have not joined a raid since your wounding. The season grows late. Soon the seas will be too dangerous." "Perhaps I have raided enough for one lifetime," Bjorn replied. Halfdan lowered his sword in shock. "You speak like a Christian, not a Viking. She has changed you." Bjorn could not deny it. Something had changed within him, something beyond the magical bond. The glimpses he had seen of Viola's memories during the healing ritual had shown him the terror of those who faced Viking raiders. He had seen himself through the eyes of his victims, and the image haunted him. That night, he dreamed of battle. But unlike his usual dreams of glory and conquest, this nightmare placed him on the receiving end of a Viking raid. He was a Saxon farmer, watching helplessly as warriors slaughtered his family. He awoke with a shout, sweat-soaked and trembling. Viola appeared at his bedside, her face concerned in the dim light of the dying fire. "Another shared dream?" she asked softly. He nodded, unable to speak. Since the ritual, they occasionally shared dreams, an unexpected consequence of their bond. "It will pass," she assured him, turning to leave. "Stay," he said, surprising them both. "Please." She hesitated, then sat on the edge of his bed. "Do you want to speak of it?" "I saw through your eyes," he said. "The day we came to your village." "Those are not my memories," she corrected gently. "I was taken in a different raid." "But yes, all raids look the same to those who suffer them." "How do you not hate me?" he asked. She considered her answer carefully. "At first, I did hate you, all of you. But hate is a heavy burden to carry, and I set it down to survive. And now?" She paused. "Now," he prompted. "Now I see you, Bjorn Bjarnason. Not just the raider, but the man. And that man is more complex than I first believed." He reached for her hand in the darkness, and she did not pull away. They sat in silence, connected by touch and the invisible threads of magic that bound them together. The following day, Jarl Eriksson called a thing assembly, a gathering of all free men to make important decisions for the settlement. The matter at hand, what to do about the approaching winter and the need for one final raid before the seas became impassable. Bjorn Bjarnason should lead the expedition, declared one of the older warriors. His luck at sea is well known. All eyes turned to Bjorn, who stood among them, tall and imposing despite his recent wounds. He felt Viola's presence at the edge of the gathering, where women were permitted to observe but not speak. "I will not lead this raid," Bjorn announced, his voice carrying across the assembly. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. "My wounds have not fully healed," he continued, though all could see his strength had returned. "Halfdan should lead in my place." The Jarl's eyes narrowed. "This is not like you, Bjorn. Is it the Saxon woman's influence that keeps you from your duty?" Bjorn met the Jarl's gaze steadily. "I make my own decisions, Jarl Eriksson. Halfdan is ready for leadership, and I have raided enough this season." The assembly accepted his explanation, if reluctantly. Halfdan was named leader of the raid, and preparations began immediately. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. If Bjorn would not raid, was he still a true Viking? That evening, as Viola tended the herbs in her small garden behind Bjorn's longhouse, 3 women from the settlement approached her. The eldest, Gunhild, was the Jarl's wife and a respected voice among the women of Hedeby. "We would speak with you, Saxon," Gunhild said, her tone making it clear this was not a request. Viola straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "I am listening." "You have brought change to Bjorn Bjarnason," Gunhild stated. "He was our greatest warrior, and now he refuses to raid. He spends his days learning women's work from you. He makes his own choices, Viola replied, echoing Bjorn's words from the assembly. The youngest of the three women stepped forward aggressively. You have bewitched him. Everyone knows of the strange bond between you. Gunhild cautioned, placing a restraining hand on the young woman's arm. We are here to talk, not accuse. She turned back to Viola. Svanhild speaks harshly, but she has cause. She was promised to Bjorn before your magic tied him to you. This was news to Viola. Bjorn had never mentioned a betrothal. I did not know, she said honestly. Now you do, Gunhild replied. So understand this, what exists between you and Bjorn cannot continue. Once the bond of your magic fades, he must fulfill his obligations to our people. To do otherwise would bring shame upon his house. The women departed, leaving Viola alone with this new knowledge. She continued her work in the garden, but her mind was elsewhere. Had Bjorn known of the betrothal when he asked her to save him? When he requested she teach him healing? When he held her hand in the darkness? When Bjorn returned from training that evening, he found Viola unusually quiet. What troubles you? He asked as they shared their evening meal. Gunhild and Svanhild visited me today, she said, watching his reaction carefully. A flicker of understanding crossed his face. Ah. They told you of the arrangement. Why didn't you? She asked. Bjorn set down his drinking horn. Because it was never my choice. The Jarl and my father arranged it years ago, to unite our families. Svanhild is a good match by Viking standards, strong, from a noble family. But? Viola prompted when he fell silent. But I do not love her, he said simply. And after what has happened between us, I cannot proceed with a marriage based solely on alliance. Viola's heart raced at his words. What has happened between us, Bjorn? She asked softly. He reached across the table and took her hand. You know what has happened, Viola of Wessex. You have seen into my heart as I have seen into yours. The magic bound our lives together, but something else entirely has bound our souls. Before she could respond, the door to the longhouse burst open. Halfdan stood in the entrance, his expression grim. Saxon ships have been spotted, he announced. Not merchants, warriors. They come seeking vengeance for the monastery raid. Bjorn released Viola's hand and stood. How many? 3 ships. They will reach our shores by morning. Prepare the defenses, Bjorn ordered, slipping effortlessly back into the role of commander. And send word to the outlying farms. All who cannot fight should seek shelter within the settlement walls. As Halfdan left to carry out his orders, Bjorn turned back to Viola. You should remain here, where it's safe. I am a healer, she reminded him. When there is battle, I am needed. These are your people coming, he said. Would you help us fight against them? Viola stood, facing him squarely. I would prevent death on both sides if I could. But understand this, I have lived among you for 3 years. While I may never be fully accepted here, this is now my home too. Her words clearly moved him. Without hesitation, Bjorn stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. When this is over, he whispered against her hair, we will finish our conversation. The night was spent in preparation. Bjorn donned his armor for the first time since his wounding, a leather tunic reinforced with iron plates, worn over a mail shirt. Viola helped him secure the straps, her fingers lingering on his shoulders. Come back to me, she said simply. He covered her hand with his own. The bond will ensure it, he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I speak not of the magic bond, she clarified. But of the other one. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He leaned down and, for the first time, pressed his lips to hers, a gentle kiss that carried the weight of promise. I will return, he vowed. Dawn broke with the warning horn's blast. The Saxon ships had been spotted approaching the harbor. Bjorn took his place at the head of Hedeby's defenders, his axe gleaming in the early morning light. Beside him stood Halfdan and the other warriors who had chosen to remain rather than join the final raid. The settlement's defenses were strong, a semicircular wall of earth and timber protected the landward side, while the harbour could be defended from strategically placed platforms. But the Saxons had chosen their moment well. With many warriors away on the last raid of the season, Hedeby's forces were diminished. The battle began with an exchange of arrows. Then the Saxon ships reached the shore, and warriors poured onto the beach. Bjorn recognized their leader, a man wearing the insignia of a Saxon lord, his face twisted with hatred and vengeance. For the monastery, the Saxon leader cried as he led the charge toward the settlement's defenses. The clash of steel on steel filled the air as the two forces met. Bjorn fought with all his former skill, his axe cutting down any Saxon who came within reach. But he took no joy in the killing, each life taken weighing on him in a way it never had before. From her position near the healing house, Viola watched the battle with growing horror. She had prepared bandages and medicines, ready to treat the wounded, but the sight of Bjorn in the thick of fighting filled her with dread. Through their bond, she could sense his conflict, the warrior's skill that came naturally to him at war with his new understanding of the cost of violence. The tide of battle seemed to favor the defenders at first. The Vikings' superior position allowed them to hold back the Saxon advance. But then a group of Saxons broke through a weak point in the defenses, threatening to outflank Bjorn and his men. Viola saw the danger before anyone else. Without thinking, she ran from the healing house toward the battle, shouting a warning. "Bjorn! Behind you!" He turned just in time to meet the attack, but in doing so, left himself exposed to the Saxon leader. The man's sword caught Bjorn across the back, slicing through his armor. He stumbled but did not fall, turning to face this new threat. "You," the Saxon lord spat. "You led the raid on our holy place. I will send you to your heathen hell." They fought one-on-one, the battle around them seeming to fade away. Bjorn was wounded and tiring, while the Saxon lord was fresh and driven by vengeance. A powerful blow knocked Bjorn's axe from his hand, and he fell to one knee. The Saxon raised his sword for the killing stroke. "For God and Wessex! Stop!" Viola's voice rang out as she placed herself between Bjorn and the Saxon lord. "Lord Edwin, hold!" The Saxon paused, his sword still raised. "Who are you that knows my name?" "I am Viola of Wessex, daughter of Alderman Sutton," she replied, standing tall despite her fear. "Your cousin?" Lord Edwin lowered his sword slightly, confusion evident on his face. "Viola? We thought you dead these 3 years past." "I was taken in a raid," she explained quickly. "But I have survived here. And this man," she gestured to Bjorn, "he is bonded to me through ancient magic. If he dies, I may follow." Edwin's eyes narrowed. "You speak of pagan sorcery. Have you abandoned your faith, cousin?" "I speak of healing," she corrected. "I saved his life, and now our lives are intertwined. Please, Edwin. Enough blood has been shed." The Saxon lord looked from Viola to Bjorn, who had regained his feet and now stood beside her. "You defend a Viking raider? The very kind who destroyed our village and killed your family." "I defend a man who is changing," she said. "As we all must if this cycle of vengeance is ever to end." Around them, the battle had slowed, warriors on both sides watching the exchange with confusion and interest. "What would you have me do?" Edwin asked. "They raided our monastery, killed our monks, stole our treasures. And before that, your people raided their settlements," Viola pointed out. "The cycle continues unless someone chooses to break it." Bjorn stepped forward, wincing from his wound. "Lord Edwin of Wessex," he said formally, "I propose an exchange. The treasures taken from your monastery will be returned, and in exchange, you will leave our settlement in peace." Edwin scoffed. "Why would I accept such terms when victory is within my grasp?" "Because while you might defeat us today," Bjorn replied, "our main force returns from their raid within days. They would hunt you to the ends of the earth to avenge this settlement. Neither of our peoples can afford such a blood feud." A tense silence fell over the battlefield as Edwin considered the offer. Finally, he nodded. Show me these treasures, and I will consider your proposal. The fighting halted as Bjorn led Edwin and a small contingent of Saxon warriors to the settlement's main hall, where the plunder from the monastery raid had been stored. Viola accompanied them, her presence serving as both mediator and guarantee of safety for both sides. True to his word, Bjorn had all the monastery treasures brought forth: silver crosses, illuminated manuscripts, ceremonial chalices. Edwin inspected each item carefully. The golden reliquary is missing, he noted. The one containing the bones of St. Cuthbert. It was claimed by Jarl Eriksson himself, Bjorn explained. But I will retrieve it. While Bjorn went to the Jarl's longhouse, Viola spoke quietly with her cousin. I had no idea you would come searching for me after all this time. We never stopped searching, Edwin told her. When rumors reached us of a Saxon healer woman living among the Northmen, I dared to hope it might be you. And the monastery raid gave you the excuse you needed to come this far north, she realized. Edwin nodded. Though I admit, I did not expect to find you defending a Viking warrior with your life. Much has changed, she said simply. When Bjorn returned with the golden reliquary, Edwin seemed satisfied. Very well. We will accept these terms. The treasures in exchange for peace, this time. And Viola? Bjorn asked, a note of tension in his voice. Edwin looked at his cousin. She is free to choose her own path. If she wishes to return to Wessex with us, she may. If she wishes to remain. He let the sentence hang unfinished. All eyes turned to Viola. The magical bond that had tied her to Bjorn had weakened enough that she could likely survive the separation now. She could return to her homeland, to her people, to the faith of her childhood. Or she could stay in this harsh northern land with the man who had once been her enemy but had become something else entirely. I will stay, she said, her eyes meeting Bjorn's. My path lies here now. The Saxon lord accepted her decision with a nod, though disappointment showed clearly on his face. Then let it be known that Viola of Wessex serves as a bridge between our peoples. Should any harm come to her, our vengeance will be swift. She is under my protection, Bjorn declared. No harm will come to her while I draw breath. With the agreement made, the Saxons gathered their recovered treasures and prepared to depart. Before leaving, Edwin embraced his cousin one last time. Are you certain of your choice? He asked her quietly. Viola looked over at Bjorn, who was giving orders to his men to stand down. I am certain, she replied. There is work to be done here, healing of more than just bodies. As the Saxon ships departed from Hedeby's harbour, the settlement began the process of recovering from the battle. The wounded were tended, the dead honoured according to their customs. Bjorn's wound was serious but not life-threatening, and Viola treated it with her usual skill, though without resorting to magic this time. You could have gone with them, Bjorn said as she wrapped bandages around his torso. Return to your homeland. My homeland is where I choose it to be, she replied. And I have chosen to remain here, with you. Even knowing what I am? What I have done. I know who you are becoming, she corrected. And that is the man I have come to love. Bjorn caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. I never thought to find love with a Saxon healer who once hated me. And I never thought to love a Viking warrior who once raided my people, she countered with a smile. Life takes unexpected paths. Their moment of peace was interrupted by the arrival of Jarl Eriksson, his face thunderous with rage. You gave away our plunder, he accused Bjorn. Trevor's rightfully won in battle. I prevented the destruction of our settlement, Bjorn replied calmly, rising to his feet despite his wound. The Saxons would have overwhelmed us eventually. Our losses would have been far greater than some Christian trinkets. And what of our honor? Vikings do not bargain with their enemies, they defeat them. Perhaps it is time for new ways, Bjorn suggested. Endless raiding brings endless retaliation. Today, we broke that cycle. The Jarl's eyes narrowed. You speak dangerous words, son of Bjarni. Your father would be ashamed to hear them. My father is dead, Bjorn stated flatly. As are many good warriors who followed the old ways without question. I choose a different path. Because of her, the Jarl spat, pointing at Viola. This Saxon witch has turned your mind from our ways. She has opened my eyes, Bjorn corrected. There is no dishonor in seeing clearly for the first time. The Jarl studied him for a long moment. You were to be my successor, Bjorn. The greatest warrior in Hedabai, married to my niece, leading our people to greater glory. Now I see that future is lost. Not lost, Bjorn disagreed. Changed. There can be glory in peace as well as war. Prosperity through trade rather than raiding. These are not Viking words, the Jarl said, turning to leave. When the others return, the thing will decide your fate, and hers. After the Jarl departed, Viola turned to Bjorn with concern. What will happen at the thing? They may exile us, he admitted. Or worse. The old ways run deep, and change comes slowly to our people. Then we should leave before the raiders return, she suggested. Your cousin Leif settled in a new land far to the west. We could join him there. Bjorn shook his head. I will not flee like a coward. If our people are ever to change, someone must stand and show them another way. The days that followed were tense with anticipation. The settlement divided into factions, those who supported Bjorn's actions and those who saw them as a betrayal of Viking traditions. Svanhild, the woman who had been promised to Bjorn, publicly denounced him and called for Viola to be tried as a witch. Through it all, Bjorn and Viola remained steadfast. The magical bond between them had faded to almost nothing, but the bond of love that had replaced it grew stronger each day. They moved about the settlement together, tending to the wounded, helping rebuild damaged structures, and speaking of a future where Vikings and Saxons might find common ground. A week after the battle, lookouts spotted the returning raid ships. Halfdan and the others had returned, their vessels laden with plunder from distant shores. The settlement prepared for the thing assembly that would decide Bjorn and Viola's fate. The gathering took place in the sacred grove outside the settlement walls. All 3 men attended, standing in a circle around the speaking stone. Jarl Eriksson presented the case against Bjorn, how he had returned the monastery treasures without a fight, how he had been bewitched by the Saxon woman, how he spoke against the old ways. When it was Bjorn's turn to speak, he stood tall despite his healing wound. For 10 years, I have raided for this settlement, he began. I have taken lives and treasure in the name of our gods and our people. I have followed in my father's footsteps without question. A murmur of agreement ran through the assembly. But when I lay dying from Saxon arrows, it was not our gods who saved me, but this woman. He gestured to Viola, who stood at the edge of the gathering. Not with Christian prayers, but with magic older than either of our faiths. Magic that showed me the truth, that we are not so different, Saxon and Viking. The murmuring grew louder, some voices angry, others curious. I do not reject our ways entirely, Bjorn continued. We are warriors, and sometimes we must fight. But we can choose what we fight for. Raid for what we need, not simply to destroy. Trade where we can, instead of taking by force. And perhaps, learn from those we once saw only as enemies. The Jarl stepped forward. Pretty words, but they do not change what you did. You gave away our rightful plunder. You speak against raiding, the very foundation of our society. I speak for change, Bjorn corrected. The world around us is changing. The Christian God spreads through the Saxon lands and beyond. We can adapt or we can perish. Halfdan, who had remained silent until now, stepped into the circle. I have just returned from the southern coasts, he said. And what Bjorn says holds truth. The Saxon kingdoms grow stronger and more united each year. Their defenses improve. The easy raids of our father's time are ending. So you stand with this traitor, the Jarl demanded. I stand with my friend, Halfdan replied firmly. Who saved our settlement while we were away raiding? The Saxons could have destroyed Hedabai completely, but because of Bjorn's actions, our homes and families remained safe. Others began to speak, some for Bjorn, others against him. The debate raged as the sun crossed the sky. Finally, as evening approached, the Jarl called for a decision. Those who would see Bjorn Bjarnason and the Saxon woman Viola exiled from our lands, stand to my right, he commanded. Those who would allow them to remain, stand to my left. The assembly divided. It was close, painfully close. But when the final count was made, more stood on the left than the right. Bjorn and Viola would be permitted to stay. The Jarl's face was grim as he announced the decision. So be it. But know this, Bjorn Bjarnason. You are no longer my chosen successor. And the betrothal to Svanhild is ended. I accept these terms, Bjorn replied with dignity. As the assembly dispersed, Bjorn took Viola's hand and led her back toward the settlement. It seems we have won the right to stay, he said. Though I fear we have made a powerful enemy in the Jarl. And what of Svanhild? Viola asked. Will she accept this outcome? She has her pride, Bjorn admitted. But in truth, I think she is relieved. Our match was arranged for political advantage, not love. They reached Bjorn's longhouse as darkness fell. Inside, the hearth fire had been lit, casting warm light across the wooden walls. What happens now? Viola asked as they stood in the doorway. Bjorn turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Now, Viola of Wessex, I would make you my wife, not by arrangement or political advantage, but by choice and love. If you will have me. Viola smiled up at him. I saved your life with forbidden magic, Bjorn Bjarnason. I think I can manage to be your wife as well. It will not be easy, he warned. Many still see you as an outsider, a Saxon among Vikings. And many see you as changed, no longer the raider they once knew, she countered. We will face these challenges together. Bjorn nodded. Together. As it has been since you bound our lives that night. Their wedding took place at the turning of the season, when summer gave way to autumn. It was not a grand affair, the Jarl and his household did not attend, nor did many of the older warriors who clung to traditional ways. But Halfdan was there, standing as Bjorn's witness, and many of the younger generation came to show their support for this new kind of union. Viola wore a blue dress in the Viking style, but with Saxon embroidery at the hem and sleeves. Around her neck hung an amulet that combined the Thor's hammer of Bjorn's faith with symbols of her own ancient magic. Bjorn dressed as a chieftain, but without the trophies of battle that might have adorned him in the past. They spoke their vows before the gods of both their peoples, their hands bound together with a cord woven from threads of both their homelands. And when Bjorn claimed Viola as his wife with a kiss, the cheers that erupted spoke of a new beginning, not just for them, but perhaps for Hedeby itself. In the years that followed, their influence grew. Bjorn still led warriors when the settlement needed defense, but he also established trading relationships with Saxon kingdoms, including Viola's cousin Edwin. Viola's healing skills became legendary throughout the region, and women from both Viking and Saxon communities came to learn from her. Their home became a place where different cultures met in peace. Children born of Viking and Saxon parents played together in their yard. Songs in both languages were sung around their hearth. And the magic that had once bound them in desperation became a symbol of how ancient enemies could find common ground. The old Jarl eventually died, and though Bjorn was not named his successor, his voice carried weight in the Thing assemblies. Slowly, the settlement of Hedeby began to change, less dependent on raiding, more engaged in trade and craftsmanship. Not all approved, and some families left to seek the old ways elsewhere. But many stayed and adapted. And if visitors to Hedeby in those years noticed a Viking warrior working alongside his Saxon wife in a healing garden, mixing herbs and teaching others the art of mending rather than breaking, they witnessed the living proof that love could indeed transcend the deepest cultural divides, that a dying Viking warrior healed by forbidden magic could claim not just a wife, but a new future for his people.